So my name is Vasilios Kosmakos. This is my coworker Shruti. We'll be conducting an interview today on September 27th, 11:13. What is your name, sir?
My name is Charles Wightman, known by Eddie.
Hello, Charles. It's a pleasure to have you.
Just call me Eddie.
All right. So hello, Eddie. So I'm gonna begin to ask you a couple questions. So where were you born, and describe your family for me?
Okay, I was born in Miami, Florida in 1941, January the 22nd. And my family, I had a father and a mother and a younger sister that's 5 years younger than I.
Fantastic. And then what did you do as a career, and when did you start?
My parents moved to Islamorada in 1949 that would put me at 8 years old. And I went to high school down here and, grade school and then high school. And after I got out of high school, I was going to the University of Florida, strangely. And Hurricane Donna came in 1960 and took my parents' business and took my parents' home and basically threw us out on the street. So I went to work. And so I had always loved fishing, and I was always doing it all the time. And my parents had a home right on the ocean and down at the lower end of Islamorada. And every day after school, you'd laugh at this, every day after school when the tide was right, I'd stuff some crabs or shrimp in my pockets, and I'd go waiting for bonefish. And then 2 or 3 days later, my mother would smell them in her pockets and wanted to know what all that was. And they were still in the pockets of my jeans. So that's my introduction. I always loved fishing. I was, my wife says that I didn't find the fishing business. The fishing business found me.
Wow. So when exactly did you become a captain? Did you start doing business?
I got my license. I got my license at 18 years old, and I became a full-time professional backcountry fishing guide in 1961.
Wow. So if you can describe some of the activities you did in your childhood, how did you kind of get acquainted with nature? Were you always fishing?
It's ingrained in my DNA to be. I was always in love with nature, and primarily because we lived in the Florida Keys, we don't have any hunting here. So I was not, and my parents and my father, none of my family were hunters. So I wasn't, privileged to try that. So, growing up in the Keys, we had all this fishing down here and the reefs and the diving and the Everglades and the crocodiles. And I was always interested in the marine environment. So that's how I got into backcountry fishing, because I liked the Everglades and I liked being back in Florida Bay.
Fantastic.
That's as opposed to what we call offshore fishing, where it's out on the reef and, the big game stuff.
So that being said, right, if you can, I was wondering how has fishing changed over the course of your lifetime? What practices, locations, or species have fallen in our favor, and why do you believe that is?
In my lifetime, I was a professional guide for, I think it was 53 years before I finally hung up my push pole and quit altogether. So that's a long time looking at the water. And, I was a full-time fishing guy. I didn't do anything else. And there was many years in my prime when I was in my 30s and early 40s where I put in 300 days a year on the water. I was very successful at what I did. So I was on the water virtually all day, every day. So what happened, what's my opinion, the fishing has gone to hell, realistically, compared to what it was in 1960. I mean, it's just not, if you just came from Chicago, it's going to be wonderful because you don't know any different. But if you compare it back 50 years, it's declined drastically.
And why do you believe that is?
Why do I believe that?
Yeah.
Well, many factors. I think the number one factor is there's too many people. And everybody thinks they're entitled to take as much as they can get, legally or not legally. So that's what's been going on for many years. But I would, if I had to pinpoint, the major factors of the decline of the resource, It would have to start with overdevelopment of the state in general, and especially South Florida. It would have to, let's see, I got some notes here. Hang on a second. Well, it'll have to, the climate change is obviously involved. The lack of political will to fund and carry out the plan to replumb and to fix the Everglades is basically, it's been a joke. If you go back over the three quarters of a century and you look back at the fixes that have been proposed and then the ones that have actually been accomplished, you can see that the percentage is very small about what could have been done compared to what actually got completed. And that all goes back to the fact that over all this period of time, there wasn't the political will to actually get these projects completed. The politicians over that time, in my opinion, this is only my opinion now, they would give a lot of lip service to fixing the Everglades and all the natural environments. But when it gets down really right down to it, they wouldn't fund it so that it actually got completed.
So that being said, right, would you mind elaborating more on your thoughts on the comprehensive Everglades program? You kind of mentioned some opinions you had about that.
The current Everglades program, it's right back to the state and the federal politicians having the political will to do what is needed to get this job done as it is planned or has been planned in the future. But more importantly, they have to stop giving lip service and they have to fund it. Because if they don't fund it sufficiently, it's not going to happen.
What do you think? So, I mean, other than funding, right? What do you think can be done on an individual level? To
individually?
Yeah.
Let's see. Individually, see what can be done. I would say personally, you and your family respect the environment and try to do what you can as a student of nature to, clean up your act and try to take care of it. And more importantly, I think is if an individual doesn't do anything, there's really not much that they can do other than pick up their own trash and that. But what they can do is they can join environmental groups such as, Friends of the Everglades and Bull Sugar and those groups that are really actively fighting to save the Everglades and to save the estuaries and things, because you have to have the numbers to have any power. If you don't have any numbers, you don't have any power, political power. So those groups, you could join one or I probably belong to a dozen of those groups just so that I've got, they can count me as a number when it comes to presenting. They have X number of, members or votes or whatever you want to call them. But that's what an individual can do. They can choose one of those environmental groups of their choice, and there's numbers of them out there, and they're all working towards the same goal. So join one of those and encourage your family and your friends to, if they're like-minded, to join them and stand up and be counted.
So over the course of the last several years, right, things like killing game fish have gone out of favor, right, and the catch and release has gone more in favor.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I said over the course of the last several years, things like killing game fish have gone out of favor, while things like catch and release have gone more in favor.
That's correct.
As a fishing guide.
Correct, but that's specifically for game fish.
Okay.
I mean, people, because of the light tackle fishing industry, primarily the tarpon and bonefish and the fly rodders, we were very successful in changing the mindset to killing everything to catch and release. And that's expanded and is pretty much done worldwide now for the major game fish. So that really didn't exist 50, 75 years ago. They killed everything. But that's for the major game fish. I mean, they still they'll take as many snappers and groupers or whatever as the law allows, and that's okay. The problem as I see is they make bag limits for these various fish, but what they don't consider is the population doubles or triples every 10 years. So, if you don't change the bag limits to reflect that there's more people, the end result is there's more fish being taken.
Do you believe that do you believe that by protecting one species over another, that you could probably help save more than one thing? So, for example, by Goliath groupers are something that have been used a lot recently. Do you think by saving Goliath groupers or by saving things like tarpon, right, we can help protect other species through an umbrella effect, or do you think it has to be done on an individual basis?
No, certainly it does, because what it does is it eventually begins to change the mindset of the fishermen. If you get people that fish back in Everglades, in Florida Bay and Everglades National Park, they pretty much release everything. That mindset has gone 180 degrees in my lifetime. And back when I first started in the early 60s, 70s, and even 80s, the fishing tournaments like the Gold Cup Tarpon Tournament and the Hawley and the Bonefish tournaments, they used to kill the fish. They'd throw them up on the dock every day, and then they'd tow them out for the sharks to eat at night. Well, that all got changed, but it didn't happen overnight. So, it's all about education. The only way you'll ever get anything changed for the better is you have to re-educate people to do it in numbers.
What species do you believe have become more coveted over the course of your lifetime that weren't really so much before?
I'm sorry, species have become more what?
Coveted. So what species are more, desirable that you've noticed over the course of your lifetime? Have you noticed a change in species kind of preference over the course of your lifetime?
I'm not sure. Was that on your sheet here?
Yes, it was.
Let's see.
You mentioned how many species are more coveted now because of the decline of previously favored species.
Oh, well, I guess my answer, I can't find what I've been, but what I've seen over my lifetime of fishing, and that's almost 70 years now, that species that were very popular with the general public and fishermen and and anglers and so on 30, 40, 50 years ago have basically been depleted so badly that species that were not coveted in the early days are now being coveted, such as the amberjack, for instance. When I grew up in the Keys, amberjack was a garbage fish. It was only used for crab bait, and now it's a big time. You see it on the restaurant menus. So, and as they deplete as species get depleted, and then they ultimately either get curtailed or closed or something like that, others get plugged in that weren't desirable in previous years. So you can go, that's another history lesson you could look into. I gave you the amberjack. That's just one example. There's many because, other species that were much more desirable then had been depleted. So the commercial, the recreational and the commercial industry turned to the amberjack and fish of that nature that weren't coveted back, 50, 60 years ago. They were crab bait.
Interesting. So, going off that answer, right? What have you seen in terms of habitat degradation? So specifically the way seagrass has kind of died off within your area. What effects have you seen as a result of that?
Well, the seagrass die-off in Florida Bay was disastrous to my business. Where I spent my time guiding clients to, tarpon and bonefish and snook and redfish and things like that, there were massive amounts of acreage that just got devoid of fish. So that was disastrous to my business. And there were times when it was really bad that I was a sport fish guide. I primarily focused on bonefish and tarpon and permit and those kind of things. It was, somewhat back in the Everglades for snook and redfish. But now here recently in the last 5+ years, I mean, Islamorada used to be the world center of the biggest bonefish that there were anywhere. And now there's virtually no bonefish here. They're all gone. They just vanished. Where they went, no one knows.
What role
they're starting to see a few more coming back because the bonefish in Florida Bay and the Keys are fed by larvae that come up from Cuba, Costa Rica, not Costa Rica, but the Yucatan, Mexico. Excuse me. That larva repopulates this area as well as the local stock. But they, as a fishing guide, you couldn't find them. They went away. I personally had multiple world record bonefish. Excuse me, I don't know what got my throat. Something's tickling me.
No worries.
And the same could be said about the next question. It could be said about the salinity because the increase in salinity basically does the same thing. It runs, if it gets too hypersaline, the fish move out of areas. It kills the seagrass kills, and that's all that data is available. I mean, you can get the amount of acreage and what dates it started and all that's all readily available. You can go to, FWC, you can go to Bull Sugar, you can go to, I would recommend, Florida Bay Forever. And they have all that data and you can get, dates, times, and numbers.
So would you mind elaborating on the role that seagrass beds play within the ecosystem, right? So what do seagrass beds do to promote bonefish, right? What is the relationship between
the seagrass beds? The seagrass beds are the very, I want to say bedrock, but the bottom of the whole food chain. If you don't have viable seagrass beds that are healthy, nothing survives because that's where the food chain starts. In my day, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were no such thing as algae blooms. They didn't exist. Every bit of the water in Florida Bay and all around the Keys was pristinely clear. The algae blooms are a new thing. They started in, I think about around 85 when the seagrass started. So, but the bottom line is you have, in order to have a sustainable marine resource, meaning everything from the crabs and the shrimp right on up to the bonefish and the tarpon, all depends on the food chain, and that all starts in the healthy seagrass beds. If you take the seagrass beds away, it all goes away.
So would you we just talked about bonefish. Would you mind talking about trout? Trout plays a
hang on. There. I didn't know it was here. Sorry.
No worries. So you discussed bonefish. Would you mind discussing sea trout now? So sea trout plays a very important role within the recreational fishing industry. Can you tell me about their role within the ecosystem and their role within the greater fishing industry?
Well, they're another canary in the coal mine, but they're specifically an estuary fish. They don't go in the ocean. So they are important to the West Coast of Florida, North Florida, Florida Bay, the Everglades, and there's been a severe decline in them in this area. They are, the fishing guides in the Upper Keys in Islamorada voluntarily, probably trying to remember 20 years ago, voluntarily voted in the Guides Association to not sell any sea trout commercially. Everything was going to be released. And that, to my knowledge, that holds today. We don't sell any, the fishing guides in this area, the professional fishing guides, I want to say, don't sell any fish that I'm aware of. There may be some, but that I'm aware of. But the sea trout is a very important recreational fish to the everyday recreational fishermen. You know, the mom and pop people that, you know, that on the West Coast, they can go out there and, you know, they can take the mom and dad and the little kids out, and, you know, they can catch a few sea trout and have a fish fry. It's very important. But you can watch the stocks and see how healthy they are. And like I said, that's the canary in the coal mine. Another one, there's plenty of them out there to look at. There's a lot of barometers out there. All you have to do is be open to look at them.
So you mentioned algae bloom several times, right? Would you mind kind of elaborating on that, right? So what have you seen? How has that changed over the course of your lifetime? Why do you think what is causing those things, and what do you think can be done to stop them?
Well, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, and I'm not going to go into what's causing it, because that's a scientific issue, and it's also a political issue. And I'm not prepared to talk about what causes them, because what causes the algae bloom is many, many faceted. From, you pick your poison, go look it up if you want the real data, what causes it, because it depends on who you ask. If you ask, you know, the fishermen, it's one thing. If you ask the big agricultural interests, it's another thing. They didn't cause it. So there's a lot of finger pointing there. I would suggest that you go look that up yourself. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not prepared to comment on what actually causes the algae blooms, because, you know, the scientists can't even agree on that.
And but more generally, in terms of water quality, right? You did mention that several decades ago the water was a lot clearer. What do you think can be done to improve water quality? Either on a community basis, a local government basis, or an individual basis?
It all comes back down. I mean, if you follow what's been going on with the algae blooms in Lake Okeechobee that have been decimating the estuaries of the St. Lucie River and the Chokoloskee River, I mean, if you go to those, it's very apparent that the nutrient levels that are being fed into Lake Okeechobee, and also like the Florida Keys, we're downstream of everything. So, you know, we get it all. So the nutrient levels is, you know, what's got to be addressed, and it's got to, in order to do that, you know, it's got to have the political, we're trying, you know, the different organizations are trying to get the political will to get them done correctly. The plan is there, the data is there, the science is there, but the political will to get the job actually funded and completed has been absent to the degree that it needs to be to get the job done correctly for many, 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 many years. And that's just my personal opinion. I'm going to say that in there. And I've been looking at it for a long time.
So are there any positive signs you've seen over the course of the last several years? I mean, specifically within the last 20 years, with the growing environmental movement kind of happening currently. Do you see any positive changes happening, or do you see a more or less a steady decline? Do you have any hope for the future?
I belong to a lot of organizations to restore the water quality to the Everglades, and I watch it and I watch it and I watch it, and the politicians give a lot of lip service and they get a little bit done, but they don't fund it to the degree that it needs to be funded to get the job done. So in my opinion, you know, I still see Lake Okeechobee, the estuaries, Florida Bay, you know, all of South Florida's estuaries are in slow decline. And, you know, there's a lot of the lip service going on, and, you know, a little bit gets done, but not enough gets done, in my opinion. And I slowly see that the Bay and, you know, the Everglades are still slowly dying. And can that be turned around? Well, scientifically it can. Realistically, I can't answer that question, because I've been looking at it for too many years now, and it's gone. It hasn't gotten fixed. Number one, if you look historically, if you look at the the comprehensive Everglades plan of what has been proposed and what has actually been completed, you'll get your answer. Because what's actually been completed is nowhere near what's been proposed. If they followed the original plan and the additional plans to improve the drainage and move the water south from Lake Okeechobee, move the water south instead of just dumping it in the Gulfs and in the Atlantic where it's just being wasted, that would help tremendously, because it would replenish the Everglades. And when you replenish the Everglades, the food chain starts growing back again. So, I don't know what, don't get me started on that. I'm tired of working with it.
I mean, if I can just actually have you elaborate on that point, though, how would restoring the Everglades help the Bay? Just so people might, because people might be interested to know what's the relation between those two things.
I've already told you, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist. Obviously, the ecology of the whole state of Florida, specifically from Lake Okeechobee all the way down through the Florida Keys, Florida Bay, the Everglades, is in dire straits compared to what it was 50, 75, or 100 years ago. No one can, I don't think there's anybody out there that'll say it's in just as good a shape now as it ever was. That's not happening. So, and it's like I keep saying, the science is out there, but the science is out there, and if they implement what the plans have been, it will help tremendously. But they have to get the plans implemented, and they have to stop. They have to stop the nutrient runoff into all the different places that actually the algae grows on, and then flush it out.
Yep.
But there's plenty of data out there that if a person wants to do, you can go to any of these groups and they can give you song and verse about exactly what you need to do. I'm not an expert, so I don't pretend to be. I'd rather see you send folks that are truly interested in what they can do to the proper people that can answer the questions correctly. And from my point of view, about the only option an individual has is to join one of these environmental groups, and everything runs up to money. The more money, everything, it gets funded. And these groups need members. That every vote counts and every dollar counts that you put there, and it depends on what your personal persuasion is. If you want to save the Everglades, then you can do that. You can help do that. If you're against it, then you're against it.
All right. Well,
I'm a lifetime environmentalist. I'm not a developer, so I don't think like a developer.
Well, that's for me in terms of questions. Do you have anything else more to add?
No, I don't think so. I think that pretty well covers it. I think it all. What can, the only thing that you got to get, an individual has to join force with enough other individuals so that you have enough political clout to really make an impact with the politicians that are making the decisions. And the only way that I know to do that is to join various and sundry, pick the group of your choice, but join something, because all those votes, politicians listen to numbers and they listen to money. So if you don't have adequate numbers and you don't have adequate funds to present your case, they're not going to pay attention to you. Because, this is just, again, my personal opinion. I think the politicians of the state in my lifetime answer to the special need interest groups. That's who they answer to, because who funds their campaigns? Just answer that question and you find out how they got the job. So once they get, if their campaign is funded by some special interest group and they get elected, aren't they beholden to whoever gave them the money to get elected? It seems like a simple question to me. It's just a hypothetical question to me, from me to me. you could draw your own conclusions. Well, I hope I helped you a little bit, but you know, I'm just an old man. I'm 80 years old, and I've been on this water almost all